Good afternoon. The topic has been formulated quite interesting, and I will try to first of all answer this question, and then I will be happy to answer your questions. Talking about the gas deal, to what extent it could be an important element that would ensure energy security for Ukraine? I believe that such gas deals are one of the elements that could give the opportunity for Ukrainian authorities to form the more efficient management of the energy sector, because to ensure the gas balance in the autumn and winter time, we lacked from 4 to 6 billion cubic meters, but the deal that was made allowed, first of all, the consumers, Ukrainian gas consumers, regular citizens, businesses, and I hope that the restrictions that the Cabinet of Ministers was trying to introduce for chemical industry will be removed, and I would like it to happen in the nearest time, because anything that could lead to taxes coming to the budget will lead to economic sustainability and economic security of the country. Are these agreements, are this gas deal a victory or defeat? I believe it's neither the success nor the defeat, because such assessments are usually made by politicians. But the specialists, the experts, have to assess such agreements based on the content. So the content, what is positive in this content for Ukrainian consumers is that the deal was made, and also there are conditions restricting the ability to use this contract with the provision take or pay, which means systemic risk for Ukraine. And basically, it does not correspond any long-term contract provisions between Gazprom and European consumers. So when such a restriction is removed that allows Ukraine to consume as much gas as it can pay for, and I would like to stress here one thing: there are difficulties with payments. I mean, the amount which is to be paid to pay back the debt, because I believe Ukraine is in a very complicated financial situation. I mean, the financial deficit in Naftogaz, and in general, the situation in Ukraine is difficult. So I believe that paying the debt which was done by Naftogaz, executing its financial liabilities, financial commitments to the creditors, was an important thing. And I believe that usually there are serious negotiations going on with the creditors about restructuring the debt. Naftogaz has not done that, maybe because the debts were provided for by, were insured by the sovereign guarantees, and the Ministry of Finance was involved into interaction with all the creditors, and their attention was focused on negotiations with the IMF and with other European institutions which were ready to provide the financing. And that is why the government of Yatsenyuk failed to concentrate its attention on the situation with NAK Naftogaz. So such deals, such agreements will be difficult to implement. And once we're talking about $1.3 billion, which are to be paid for the previously delivered gas, and this is to be paid by the end of the year. According to the government, these amounts are reserved at the accounts at the National Bank, and we hope that we can be not concerned with that. But talking about the payments to be made as prepayment by NAK Naftogaz, but at the same time, NAK Naftogaz has to pay for reverse gas supply. Here we have many questions. Maybe the bad practices will continue, which deteriorate the financial situation, not just at NAK Naftogaz, but of the state in general. I mean, when the money is transferred from the state budget to NAK Naftogaz via recapitalization. That's not the something that was done by that government, but by this government, but the current government, doubled the sum of money which were transferred to the state-owned company, and this way took the commitments on paying the debts of the company. But usually the owner shouldn't be responsible for the debts of the company. There should be very clear division of responsibility. So we, the Kyiv Institute for Energy Research, we have sent signals to the government of Yatsenyuk, to the Ministry of Finance. We were saying that this should be stopped, and we need to create the model of targeted subsidizing for the non-protected population, those who may feel special difficulties if the prices for gas will go up. But at the same time, we need to state that we are ready to have the basic price for all consumers, and all the discounts can be present only in commercial sector where the volumes of procurements are huge, or long-term contracts allow to create such relations between the consumer and supplier. Talking about some limiting price and manipulations by the state, such manipulations should be made only to the extent that everyone understands that everyone has to pay for gas, otherwise the gas will not be supplied, and the should be documents supporting that, the regulatory documents supporting that, the regulatory documents of the government, of the ministry, of all the participants of the process. I am saying that in relation to the agreements that were reached, but because execution of agreements will depend on how decisive the new government is, and this way such agreements will give some interval, but
however, they do not allow the new government to rest on, a positive wave and to wait for the situation to dissolve itself. On the contrary, if we speak about the opportunities that these agreements open, this can lead us to more or less stable gas supply in the autumn and winter heating season. However, after this, our storages will have only buffer gas in store, and as Prime Minister said, we will have zero, although on paper there could be 4.8 to 5 billion cubic meters, but it should not be extracted because in essence this is a buffer gas, although according to accounts, it is in active balance. So in this connection, I want to say that any political agreements in the sphere of energy production that can be reached within the framework of the coalition that has been now formed and the government have to be imbued with the understanding that the professional composition of the Ministry for Energy and shall be renovated in a radical way. There should not be people who are responsible for the existing practice of the functioning of the market. For the situation with the monopoly domination on this market, with the cross-subsidizing and other aspects that do not allow the energy sector of Ukraine to develop at a rate that it should be developing if we want to retain stability of industry and have some potential. This concerns not only the nomination for a minister, but also the formation of a team that would not heed the desires of oligarchic groups that are traditionally well heeded to by our politicians and are taken into account while there are coalition negotiations. First of all, these should be people who can work as a single team and can work for the new strategy of energy security. And in this connection, it is important that important is not only the team that will come to work at the ministry, but the persons and individuals that will be responsible for this sector at the level of the Cabinet of Ministers. I think that the attention of the Prime Minister is important, but there should be also the Vice Premier who will be responsible for this, maybe the first Vice Premier who used to be responsible for energy sector and industry, so that he reacts in an adequate manner and not go in along well-trodden paths that were launched in 2007 by the government of Yulia Tymoshenko with the retention of the populist model of price formation. It is also important to note that, of course, there should be an attention at the level of the president, not as a figure who provides for negotiations and takes part in negotiations on gas delivery, gas supply. I think that this is a vicious practice, not efficient one. More than that, when we look at the history of Ukraine, we can draw a conclusion that the participation of the president in such negotiations has usually led to systemic deformations and the appearance of intermediaries in supply, disbalance of prices as far as supply and transit is concerned. There's a lot of examples starting from 2002, then 2004 and 5. Every gas crisis was solved by the interference of a president or prime minister, their personal interference, but this has not led to a desired effect. So we need systemic work here on the part of the Council for National Security and Defense as an important structure of strategic sector of security. The attention to energy security should be no less than to military security. In order to achieve this, you have to launch a full-scale work of the Council Regrettably, the specialists say that the present composition of the Council for National Defense and Security and the absence for a long time of the secretary of this body cannot provide for the full-fledged participation of this body in providing for national security. Also, the positive thing in these agreements is that they are provided for not only by a trilateral protocol with the participation of the European Commission who also signed the protocol, but also by a bilateral amendment addition to the contract between Naftogaz and Gazprom, and I hope that these agreements will have a legally reliable nature if Ukraine fulfills the condition of prepayment and the conditions that are basic for these conditions to be fulfilled. I mean the payment for the first tranche of the debt amounting to 4.5 billion US dollars. Thank you. I'll be glad to answer your questions. I'm sure we have questions. Colleagues, do we have questions? Then I will start. Let's talk about price formation for the next year, because there is a huge question how they will calculate the price from January 2015, because I understand that there is still a old price formation way with the taking into account the formula of 2009. So how will be calculated the price? You are very, very right.
In the end of 2014 and the first quarter of 2015, the basic formula of the contract will not be changed, and the terms which are present in these agreements are known forum. That is the same as Kharkiv agreement. That is the reduction of price not more than by a third or $100. The price is about $370 per 1,000 cubic meters for the fourth quarter of 2014, and the indicative price for first quarter of 2015 is $364, and that is similar to what is in the market of the raw oil, but this we call it indicative price. And it will be adjusted, and it could be either lower or a little bit higher, but within the range of 360, 370, and that's quite a good price for January. If we look at the prices in the European gas market, but taking into account the netback approach, when the European market price is taken as the basis and the cost of transit is distracted from it, then this price could be a little bit higher. I believe that the more adequate price for Russian gas for Ukraine for winter period would be the price within $320, $340 range for 1,000 cubic meters. But we understand that the issue of pricing from the very beginning were basically not discussed, because the so-called winter agreement is the agreement on the price of the contract. But could it go down to the level 320? I believe that there might be some special agreements, but beyond the autumn-winter period, and in case if the team of managers is strong, and if this is a team which can ensure that the strategic plan is implemented and the group of negotiators is reinforced, and we need to add not just the arguments in the energy sector. I believe that a new round of intergovernmental negotiations is to be opened, but we need to prepare very well to it. But hasty solutions are not convincing for Ukrainian politicians and partners. And despite the statement of the Prime Minister during the visit to Ukrtransgas and the statement that there should be very quickly constructed the connection between Ukrainian and Polish gas pipeline. Basically, this does not correspond to the rates of and what could be done. Most probably, there will be the reverse flow along the Slovakian route, and probably we need to have negotiations with the group of European Union countries, and this should be something which is to be included into the contract. Many experts call Brussels gas deal, and they are saying that Ukraine paid for gas well-being of Europe, because there are many questions about what are the sources for financial health of Ukraine, because the assistance of European Union is about $2 billion, but Europe will not give this $2 billion as a gift. IMF is talking about next loan, which could be provided starting from the beginning of 2015. So is that really so? Have we presented just as a gift to Europe such non-problematic supplies of gas for the next year? And Europe want more. I believe that Ukraine still has to state about its interests in different spheres, in the security sphere including, and this will not be limited by modernization of the law on the basics for national security. It should be done at the level of creating an efficient government, because if people who are in the government do not understand it, it is impossible to put it into the document. They're not working with some documents which are helping them, but they work with what is in their heads. As to whether Ukraine paid for the winter well-being of Europe, I would put it in such a way. Ukraine has been always paying and will be paying all its accounts. And the gas accounts will not be paid by European Union. Even the loans which Mr. Oettinger and Mr. Barroso mentioned, even this money Ukraine may get not earlier than the beginning of next year, and Ukraine has to pay today. That is why I mentioned this model of subsidizing, and this probably will be done according to the same scheme, unless new people will surprise us with new approaches, and there might be such approaches. There might be approaches on creating the insurance reserve. In the dialogue with Naftogaz, I have already mentioned that the model of the creating the insurance reserve is the most adequate for Ukraine, and for that we need financing, but this financing shouldn't be transferred to Naftogaz. These are all the money which are to be at the disposal of the government or special agency, and the model of functioning of such reserve is the subject for another discussion, but I believe that we need to stop direct subsidizing of Naftogaz. Was Ukraine right? Ukraine has preserved its interests, and the interests of Ukraine and European Union coincided. If we had better energy diplomacy, and our government would be thinking more about how to please partners who from the external support for the government, but if they were thinking more about the maintaining the interests on the balanced terms, then we would have received the support of European Commission in a different format. What would be this format? That's another subject, but most of the countries of European Union would really suffer difficulties if Russia had stopped the gas supplies, not just for Ukraine, but for Europeans as well, having terminated the transit. And the reverse flows would be equal to zero. And Madam Merkel is right. She was not defending the interests of Russia, but she was just stating the objective fact. If the gas flow via Ukraine stops, then the volume of gas from Europe could not be coming to Ukraine because the demand.
Any other questions? Oh, yes, there is a question from the audience. Before the beginning of the last round of negotiations, the Ukrainian side said that there's a desire to review the agreement on transit, but then this issue was removed and it was not discussed. So what are the prospects for such review? I think that this is one of the important components whose solution has to allow Ukraine to organize its relations with the European partners in a different way. And the revision of this agreement, or I would say the signing of the new contract for the transportation of Russian gas, the new model on entrance, exit, and also the payment at certain conditions on the depending on the length of the route and on the use of technical gas and other balancing moments. I emphasize balancing moments both from Europe and Russia and Gazprom. They are important. And at the moment we have the balancing contract broken that allowed European customers to faster get the volume of the gas that could be needed by European customers. This was traditionally done at the expense of the gas in underground storages. How can you go back to those negotiations? Same as I told you before, the new government has to form and the ministries have to form a clear-cut tasks and aims that should be realized in the nearest future, and Ukraine has to warn the Russian partners that non-revision of the contract can lead to the stoppage of transit. I think that this is a feasible position for Ukraine, because you cannot go around and try to convince someone to go to a new model. Ukraine has taken some obligations when it joined the European Energy Community, and within the framework of these obligations, this could be a natural process which will result in a dissolution of the agreement. Of course, we should warn Gazprom in advance, but at the same moment, Gazprom should be deprived of other peculiarities of its functioning in this key. You know, the current model created this imaginary virtual hat of the virtual exporter of Gazprom, who received the gas on the western border of Ukraine and was was the master of all these supplies, and that's why they controlled even the rivers from Slovakia. Ukraine has to break those contracts and to sign the interconnection agreements about the joining of our gas transportation systems that would allow to work and use all the principles that are there in the gas transportation legislation of the European Union, including rivers and avers and the meeting flows of gas. And the limitations now do allow to use a great rivers from Slovakia. I have the last question to you. You mentioned a very important point about the influence of oligarchic groups on the government of Ukraine, including for instance, the formation of the Ministry for Energy that would be free from oligarchic groups would be very useful. Do you think that such a team could be really formed and Ukraine can be deprived of this influence of oligarchic groups? I think that Ukraine has no other way out but to form a professional government, and I don't know whether this will be done at this stage of political process, or this opportunity won't be used, but we should come to this, and the awareness of such a need and responsibility in the face of society from the politicians who's got some level of trust at the elections to this Parliament of Ukraine is a factor that can, in the end, lead to the formation of such a government and such authority. I'm not sure how much the oligarchic circles understand this, those who supported the politicians in their movement to the parliament. I don't think that they understand this to the end. I think that here the public discussion on this issue as well can influence the closed nature of appointments and promotion of people to different positions in the government. I think that this is the task of not only the experts who work in the energy sector, but also of the colleagues who are engaged in security and issues in politology, political sciences. And of course, this is the issue for the society as well that could rather firmly demand from the politicians that they fulfill the obligations that they have been sowing. Thank you very much. It is very important for us to know your opinion as a key expert in this field, and thank you for sharing with us. And our next briefing is going to happen in